Welcome to our newest episode of the Lebanese Physicians podcast. And today we will be talking about how to get to Australia for your medical training. We've talked about how to get to Germany previously. We've talked about how to get to the UK, and now it's the third in this series, which is how to get to Australia for your medical training. And this is with Dr. Serge Geara, who is currently a neurology resident at the University of Sydney. But actually, he did his high school in Lebanon and also did half a year of medical school at the Lebanese American University before transferring to Australia for reasons that he may discuss with us during this podcast. And he's currently in Sydney, Australia. And as you can see behind me here, it's a skyline. I can move just to show the upper house behind me here. But Serge is saying that this is not the typical Sydney skyline, but I guess it does the job because we've got the upper house behind us. Welcome, Serge, to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's very exciting. Just a first caveat, I'm not a travel agent, so getting here medically, yes, I'm not really good at the tickets, but I'm happy to help. And second caveat is that's the angle. It's just the angle of the skyline is a bit different. So but this is sounds like the real upper house. But either way, beautiful city. You want to be here, and we'll talk a bit about getting here and training and all of that stuff.
Yeah, because a lot of people, I think, go to the US, to the UK, to Germany, to France, but not a lot of people from Lebanon, I think, end up going to Australia. So how did you end up deciding to leave LAU Medical School and transfer over to University of Sydney?
I mean, for me, it was a bit of a personal choice. There was a family situation here in which some of my family members had moved here, and I felt like I needed to come here. And initially, what started as let's call it quote unquote altruistic choice actually became a very good choice, I think. I think training in Australia as a doctor is one of the best training places in the world. Don't quote me exactly, but I think the healthcare system of the Australian healthcare system is one of the top 10 consistently in the world. And, you know, there's a lot of research that is there. There's a lot of good work-life balance. And it's one of those places where the weather is nice. Obviously, people don't think about it as first choice given its distance from Lebanon. And it's not a lot of, people leave Lebanon for Australia or leave Lebanon anywhere to Australia to think about specifically of training, but there's a lot of nice things that we can talk about coming here. Okay. So I came in just to finish my studies at the University of Sydney, and I was still actually thinking about the United States. But as things started to form themselves, I found myself kind of conveniently falling here into Sydney. After finishing university here, med school, I applied to the hospital system here, and I started as a junior doctor, which is general hospital doctoring for the first 2 years. And since then, I've done internal medicine training since.
Excellent. And so basically you did your medical school over there. And is it similar to the US and to certain places in Lebanon where you do your first several years as a Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Engineering or Arts and then go into medical school afterwards, or in Australia, you directly go into medical school?
So it's a bit of both, really. So Australian medical schools come in graduate and undergraduate pictures, and it depends on the university itself. I had already done psychology as an undergraduate level in American University of Beirut in Lebanon. And I was thinking about becoming a psychiatrist initially. That was my plan. But things kind of changed as my interests developed. So I went to a graduate level, and which is University of Sydney. I was also accepted to an undergraduate level. The only, I guess, big thing is relating to tuition. So as an Australian permanent resident or citizen, you don't pay a big amount of tuition, or your tuition gets added to your tax later. But as an international student myself, we are usually the people who subsidize the other students. So it's a significant amount of money, but I would say that it's probably the best balance of having fun, if there's such a thing in medical school, in terms of whether access to other activities, but at the same time, being able to learn a lot. And I think there's a lot that I've learned from, evidence-based medicine, clinical hands-on medicine, that I don't think I would have been able to be exposed to in other medical schools.
And how many years is medical school in Australia?
It was 4 years in the University of Sydney. Usually undergraduate medical schools are 5 or 6 years. But mine was 4 years, of which 2 years were mostly like written component, although there's once a week where you went to hospitals, you're assigned to a hospital. And then there's 2 years of mostly clinical with obviously some exams associated.
Okay, so basically,
And
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. There's one thing that I think I had the kind of the benefit of is actually comparing med school hand to hand. So initially, when I started in LAU med school, we did kind of the same basics as we did with the University of Sydney. And I think the idea is that there's probably more concentrated, heavy knowledge in the first 6 months in LAU, and then that knowledge was kind of spread apart. So eventually, we got to get almost the same knowledge, but it took a couple of years, 6 months of training happened. And furthermore, there was less simulation, more hands-on, because the hospitals were already kind of set up for training as well. And that helped give different opportunities than it would have been being in Lebanon.
Yeah. And so basically what you're saying is you've got two choices for medical school. Either you do some undergrad years and then go into 4 years of medical school, or you can directly go into medical school, which will be probably a 6-year program in that case.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And if you can tell me, if I'm asking, like, I want to compare to the US, so how much is the yearly tuition for medical school for international students in Australia?
Yeah, so again, another caveat to start with, Australia is both very well paying, but also one of the most expensive, but also one of the most rewarding places in terms of money later on. So med school on my university on that time was around 60,000 Australian dollars, which at the time was worth more American dollars, but I think it's flipped since then. And I think despite the increase in tuition, the exchange rate has gone down. So it actually partially depends on the exchange rate to American dollars or Canadian dollars, because there's a lot of Canadian international students as well, as well as 60 to 70. Again, Sydney is an expensive city, but I think in the long run it is rewarding. So 60 times 4, 240,000 Australian dollars, which is a lot, but it's worth the education level, I think.
Yeah, not much different than medical school in the United States, I think, for the most part. So after medical school, you apply to training. Is there a difference in applying to training in Australia if you are a graduate of an Australian medical school versus if you're a graduate of an international medical school?
Yeah, I think given that I was initially interested in applying to the US match, I think that it's a good way to provide kind of a comparison. So it's very interesting because the system is made in such a way. If there's a graph looking at amount of effort and exams that you do in the US match versus the amount of effort and exams that you do in the Australian system. The Australian system, you do some of the exams in medical school, but you don't do the very high level, difficult examinations until you graduate. As a person who's a local graduate, even though I'm international by nationality, you get to apply to a pool of different applicants, and you get to either first get rural jobs or you can get city jobs if there's a lot of city jobs left. If you're coming from abroad and applying directly into the medical system as a medical doctor after graduating, you have to do something called the Amc exam, which has a practical component and written component. And myself, I don't know a lot about the details, but the exam includes a viva and includes a written component, and they rely on their main GP book, which is called MERTAC. Now, from my point of view, you put your own preferences once you graduate, and it's actually a lottery system based on which hospital you end up in. And then after that, the first 2 years, you do a certain level of, as a doctor, equivalent level of at least a bit of emergency, bit of internal medicine, bit of surgery, and free kind of 2 months of 2 terms of around 4 to 5 months of free terms. And then as a resident, you kind of it's called intern the first year, and then as a resident you get another 5 terms which are mixed but mostly tailored to your specialty. And then either you apply then into your college. So a college is a set of specialties which are related to each other. So physicians is the equivalent to internal medicine. There's obstetrics and gynecology. There's a pediatrics college. There's a psychiatry. There's a surgery college. Critical care includes ICU, anesthetics and emergency. And then there are others that I can't recall now. And then in these colleges, there are a set of exams that you need to do. So instead of having to do the USMLE as a medical student, you just pass your medical student exams. And then once you start specializing the specialty that you want, this is when you do the exams that are specific for each and every of these colleges, which makes it more difficult. And I think it's a good exercise to balance your work and your exam life. But at the same time, it's a bit specialized towards what you need to do. And I think there's a big push in the Australian system, and that's an opinion people might not share with me, towards having very high clinical and practical skills. It's a public health system. There's a lot of, the clinical exam is considered one of the most difficult in the world. There's something called a long case in the physician's exam, which is an hour conversation with a patient about all their medical and social problems. And it's a system that values health equity and equality, and it's shown in the way that training happens. So that's why it's always very rewarding to work in this system, especially if you believe that everybody deserves the care that everybody else does. And now, once you finish internal medicine, which I finished the exams for, you can apply to the subspecialty, and it's called advanced training or fellowship sometimes in other places. I'm applying to advanced training in neurology next year, but all the terms of neurology that I've done count towards some time as well.
So just to summarize for people, so there's 2 ways, I guess, to get into medical training in Australia. If you're a Australian medical student, there's no specific exams initially that you need to do other than you get into a lottery system, and then basically you're doing more like sort of a general medicine year, right? 1 year of internship. And then,
That's right.
then you do exams specific to the specialty that you're applying to, and then go into the subspecialty afterwards. If you're applying internationally, you have to sit for exams up front, get into an internship via a lottery again, and then still have to do the exams for the specialties that you're applying for a year into it. So am I correct with that?
Yeah, so the system for the international students I don't think is a lottery, but I'm not sure 100%. But I can ask some of my colleagues about that as well.
Okay. And is it harder for international students to get into the system than if you're a graduate of an Australian medical school?
Yes, so it's a bit of a lower priority, but Australia is a country with a lot of gaps of need in rural areas, and it's a good entry point to be able to enter through rural hospitals. And certainly there's a lot of rural general practice and rural hospital doctors, especially emergency and internal medicine, that enter through the gate of either regional or rural hospitals. Okay. And that is usually one of the ways to get through. And through that, rural hospitals always have an affiliation with city hospitals, in which you can usually get some sort of chance to, be able to get your contacts in terms of being able to apply to the jobs in the city if you want to. And there's a lot of people who really enjoy the rural life because, less pollution, still very nice communities. There's amazing nature there. I worked at Orange as part of my training. Every training program has usually a secondment to rural Australia because it's an area of need that's always there. And Orange was a great city. It's a great, snow in the winter, lots of fruits in the summer city. It's a great wine country. It's a very nice skiing area sometimes. So it has a lot to it. And in the hospital there was, I know that's very Australian, there was kangaroos on the grounds, and you could just hang out with them sometimes. When you're on your lunch break, you just go out and they're there. They're not as violent as the YouTube videos make them to be. So don't be shocked by that. But yeah, so that's usually one of the opportunities. The other one is through knowing some of the hospitalists, and some people do some research work in urban areas. And certainly, if I can help within my contacts within internal medicine, anybody can contact me. I'm happy to be contacted.
Right. So basically, to get into your first year of internship, it's mostly possibly a rural hospital, and then you can make some contacts after you get in there and try to see if you can move to a urban hospital, because most of the specialties, I guess, are based in urban hospitals. If you're in a rural hospital, it's mostly going to be more of a general specialty, like just internal medicine or EM, but you cannot specialize in these specialties afterwards in a rural hospital.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, there's a lot of specialties that are even required in the rural areas. So orthopedics, for people who are interested in orthopedics, there's a lot of good rural jobs. And I'm talking about New South Wales, which is the city which is Sydney is under. There's a lot of city generalist internal medicine or surgery jobs that are open. And there's a lot of push towards generalist medicine as being a certain percentage of taking care of patients, depending on which state or which city you end up in. So that's another thing to also consider. If you really don't know what kind of specialty you want, you can actually just do a little bit of everything. And being a general medicine consultant, which is a boss, like an attending equivalent, or emergency attending, or just a general surgery attending, etc.
And when you say jobs, it seems to me like you call a training position a job, right?
Yeah, there's a bit of corporate lingo in it all. They call the consultant or the attending, sometimes it's called the boss, and then kind of semi-formal manner. They call the juniors are called initially intern, then JMO, junior medical officer, which is equivalent to your resident 1, resident 2 years in America. And then the registrar is when you're specialized in one kind of general specialty, and then you're called either senior registrar, advanced trainee once you're a senior resident equivalent, or kind of a fellow in those areas. So a bit of different lingo, but you kind of get there. I think it takes maybe 2 or 3 years extra to get through your exams and stuff, but you're usually well remunerated during that time. Obviously, there's the emotional stigma of not passing from the first time and things like that, because these exams tend to run once or twice a year, but you're still employed during all that time. It's all about balancing your time with work, and we can talk about that a bit
so
later.
basically, if you do your first year and you do the exams and you don't pass them, you can just keep repeating that year until you pass the exams. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, the exams are not necessarily after first year. After you enter a college, it depends on the college you're in. So for example, in internal medicine, you have to have done at least 2 or 3 years before you can do first a written exam, and then the clinical exam once you pass the written exam. My experience, for example, I passed the written exam first up in 2019, and then I failed my clinical exam in 2019 July, and then 2020 had a COVID situation. So the clinical exam, which requires interaction with patient, was postponed to 2021, and I just passed again in 2021. So that means 2 years where you're working without kind of feeling like your career progressing, but at the same time, you are, still within the system. You are making your contacts. You are getting clinical exposure. You're trying to make yourself better. And I think to the better or to the worse, the Australian system really values having good contacts. I mean, obviously, it matters how good of a doctor you are, but having good contacts, good references is very highly regarded. They want people who really are able to work with, in different clinical environments, inpatient, outpatient, with different attendings, and being able to do the work while being good interpersonally. And I think this one thing they highly regard.
Okay. So on the average, I guess, to be like in urology attending, eventually you probably will need about 5 to 6 years to get there.
If you pass everything, I think 5 to 6 years. First up, I'm probably going to be PGY 8, 9, which is also not unheard of. And I'm also currently doing a part-time job with masters, which is, again, I don't see a lot of places that do offer part-time and have that flexibility as well.
Right. And the pay is good, right? Like during these residency years, your pay, I mean, you can survive with it. It's survivable pay.
Yeah, I think so Australian, like I said before, one of the Sydney, I think, is probably one of the top 10 most expensive cities, but also has the second or third highest minimum wage. And doctors is the same thing. I think the minimum wage for doctors, it's usually based not on where you are in terms of a job, but if you're in a public residency kind of post, it's how many years postgraduate. So PGY ones are all paid the same across the board. I think Australia is one of the rare places where you can do your 40 hours a week. I mean, obviously, sometimes you're rostered in after-hour shifts, and you do kind of ward cover or, you know, a certain area of the hospital cover for 12, 14 hours once every month. But you get well remunerated. Everything is very clearly given, and the workers' rights in general are a big deal, and specifically for doctors. You can't be rostered on 2 shifts without a 10-hour break in between. You know, depending on the hospital, most hospitals take care of you, food after hours, all of that stuff. So, and an entry level money would be, you know, around maybe, don't quote me exactly, but around $45 to $50 an hour as a junior doctor, which is very decent. You can, you know, live pretty well. I don't think you'll be able to save the first 1 or 2 years, but afterwards, and again, this is just very generic advice, but eventually you'll be able to get there just because housing, rent, and buying is hyper expensive. But, you know, day-to-day living is decent.
Right. And so basically, let's say you're doing your PGY1 or PGY2 year, but you fail your exams, then you still get the same pay until you pass your exams, right? Because you have to be ascending the ladder for you to increase your pay.
It depends on your PGY. It doesn't depend on whether or not you pass the exam.
Okay, excellent. That's
Yeah.
great.
And there are people who actually get stuck in the treadmill. They're called career medical officers who never pass their exams, so they can't progress their specialty. So they just kind of do general medicine, and the pay kind of plateaus at some point, but you're kind of not a specialist in anything. So eventually, once you're done and you're attending, you can open your own specialty rooms. You have to refer to by GP, so even GPs need to become specialists per se. And then this is when you kind of get out of the hospital system to have your own teaching, or you can be part of the hospital system with a kind of a proxy outside or in the private system.
Good. And finally, so just to summarize, actually, what you just said, the pay increases over time. It seems to be pretty good pay, and if you are working more than 40 hours a week, actually get extra pay because you're taking extra shifts over the recommended 40 hours that you need to take.
That's right. Yes. And I think, yeah, I think generally this has been changing over the last few years. People didn't used to claim their after-hour work or their very extra work or anything like that. But recently, this culture has been changing towards that, and I think that will reflect to anybody. I would say make as many connections as you can. Work hard. Some things are approached a bit differently in Australia. So I've by virtue of being on the internet studying for my USMLEs, I've learned that there's different approaches to things like, you know, antibiotic resistance or treatment of certain diseases or things like that. That is a bit different in Australia, but always try to keep an open mind, and I think that has been very helpful. And just realized that a lot of Nobel Prizes came from Australia as well. One of my personal favorite stories is the story of the two biomedical and scientist and doctor who discovered that H. pylori causes a lot of ulcers, and they actually drank H. pylori and then treated and gave themselves an ulcer and then drank antibiotics and cleared it to prove that this is their theory, which I think is very laudable. A lot of immunology discoveries were done here. So there's a lot of scope for research as well, but also there's a scope for work day to day. And there's a lot of concentration on making sure everything is fine. Also, I just want to note on a side note, although currently I'm having a difficult lockdown, I think Australia was one of the countries that, as a country, dealt very well with the COVID pandemic. One of the lowest per capita deaths, and they had a very good lockdown system. The ICUs and the ventilators were not overwhelmed because of the general public's response to everything. This year, it's been a bit different because vaccination has been slow, so that was been a bit weak. But generally, people do listen to medical advice, and there's good high literacy here, which is very helpful.
Excellent. And so last question for you is, once you're done with your training, you get to be an attending. Do you like apply for jobs, or is it just through connections that you stay where you are, or how does it work? Like, is it like jobs are listed on some websites, you apply to them and you get a job?
It depends. It depends what you're looking for. So if you're looking for a low risk, medium reward sort of job, you can do a hospital job, which doesn't pay a lot comparatively to your colleagues, but you have more access to academics in terms of research and things like that. And you have to do your on-call weeks depending on what their on-call schedule is. On top of that, you can open what they call your own rooms. So I don't know how it is in other countries, but you can't be seen as a neurologist. I need to be referred to by a general practitioner just to decrease unnecessary follow-ups, or through the hospital system. So somebody gets a stroke, needs a follow-up, can come and follow up with me. And finally, you can work through the private, which is kind of a parallel system where things happen a bit faster. If you need them to, like if you need to get your, I don't know, if you need to get your lipomas removed and you don't want to wait a year under the public system, you do it through the private. So if you're a general surgeon, you can do your private style. So you have to have a bit of, I guess, business savvy from that point of view. But generally, I don't think there's any doctor that's not doing well financially after that. And you can kind of get yourself in the niche that you want to. I would argue Australia is the land of opportunity in a way. You know, everybody talks about America just because by virtue of having 25 million people instead of 350 million people, there's less ideas. There's less ideas for competition. So one of my colleagues is currently now doing his final year of training before becoming a consultant, and he wants to do respiratory neurology Parkinson's research. So research into movement disorders, but their association with earlier sleep disorders. And I'm pretty sure there's probably 100 doctors in the States who have done that, but he's probably the first or the second who's studying that specifically. So there's scope to kind of be your own pioneer in a lot of places, and there's a lot of resources if you want to indulge in it, and that's very helpful.
So I think we've done a good review and summary of how to get to Australia, and I think just to summarize what we've talked about, you've got two ways to get there. Either you go into medical school there, which is a bit expensive, so you have to have some money to spend to get there, or you can come there from internationally. It is harder, but initially you can have some entry point to some of the rural areas and then transfer over to urban areas afterwards. Once you're in the system, the pay for training is relatively good. You're protected with 40-hour shifts. You still have to do some difficult exams, but eventually you pass them for the most part. And afterwards, once you get to be an attending, you've got a good life.
Yes. I just want to talk 30 seconds to a minute. Sorry if I took too long.
No.
Lifestyle here, the Australian way, quote unquote, is a way of making sure that you take care of yourself while you do everything. I think this has actually negatively impacted the vaccination, in which, you know, everything was spread apart. There wasn't that sense of urgency, but at the same time, it helps during normal days for on the individual level to make sure people are, you know, well taken care of, that you have enough time off to enjoy the sun. You have enough time off to enjoy the skyline that's behind you, whether it's real or not, and the opera house and all these nice places. So there is time to enjoy all of these things, you know, and you know. I think that's to be said about, you know, having a good lifestyle, good place to live in. It's not, you know, it's not like, I'm sorry to be bad mouthing maybe being a New York doctor where you have to work very long hours. There's always stress. There's always stress of being sued. There's always stress of working 100 hours. I know it's officially it might not be the case, but there's a lot of people who are overworked. And there is a risk of overwork for any kind of doctor anywhere in the world, but I think it's less so in Australia because they do, there's that lifestyle is across the board, whether you're doing, being a builder, being an engineer, being a politician, or being a doctor. And I think this is what a lot of people will enjoy living here. And I hope that people who come here, they'll contact me. I'd like to update them about my experience and everything that I've gone through.
Yeah, I will put your contact information actually once I publish the podcast. And just to say, so do you have a Twitter handle?
I don't go with Twitter. I do
What?
go with Instagram and Facebook. So my Instagram is a bit of a teenage nickname. So it is Damayn, DAMAYN 44. Happy to be contacted through that platform. Happy to be contacted through Serge, Geara, Facebook. And if you guys want to ask any specific questions, I'm happy to help. And I would love to, have a lot of my colleagues here. It would be really good. One of the jokes I've had with my colleagues back in LAU when I left is I wish I can just take the med school and take it here so I can have all the good social interactions that I've had in Lebanon. But if I can have some of it, I'll definitely not say no, and I'll be very excited and happy.
Yep. Yeah, I think and I think there's a lot of Lebanese in Australia historically. Like I have 7 cousins in Melbourne actually.
That's right. Yes. I don't think a lot of their attraction is towards higher, being a doctor or anything like that. However, there are a lot of doctors. It's just because of the way wages are done. They'd rather do a physical job. But there is a lot of Lebanese people here, very active community. They help out with a lot of things. If you're spiritual, there's a lot of good, mosques and churches that you can be active in if you want to help your community. I'm currently involved in a medicine drive to help deliver medicine directly to people who need it in Lebanon, like by name. And you can always be part of that. I'm also part of ALMA, so Australian Lebanese Medical Association.
Right.
So if you guys want to contact us about any help, I'm happy, or collaborations, I'm happy to work a way around it.
Yeah, I am part of Elma USA here, and we've met actually Dr. Walid Ahmar, I think.
Oh yeah, Walid, yeah. Good.
So,
small world. There's always a Lebanese guy who knows a Lebanese guy, right? And as my American brother-in-law has said,
he's doing some great work.
Yeah, exactly. As my brother-in-law says, there's always a Lebanese person who knows somebody in California for some reason.
All right, Serge, it was great doing podcast with you.
Thank you. When I go to DC, Khalil, hope you show me around. I did do elective in the States when I was a medical student. Did Duke and UCLA. So I really enjoyed the States as well medically, but 2 different worlds. And I'm happy to talk more in detail for whoever has questions or queries.
Right. All right. Thanks, Serge.
Thank you. Have a good one. Appreciate your time.